Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Bortz. I'm one of the facilitators. We are very lucky to have a real expert and an important figure in the open education world at the moment to join us with with this webinar for the Creative Commons Certificate course. I'm just going to introduce our speaker and then turn it over to him. And just a couple of quick notes. This is a meeting Zoom, so please mute your mic if you're not actually asking questions. Our speaker Eddie has said he's happy to have you put questions in the chat, and he may see them, or I may remind him of them. Or if there seems to be a pause, and there may be moments to turn on your mic if you choose to do so. This is being recorded, so if you don't want your face on the internet used to train AIs, then you should turn off your camera or something like that. And you can rename yourself as well. Let me introduce our speaker. So Dr. C. Edward Watson is the Vice President for Digital Innovation at AAC&U. He provides leadership for the association's national and state level advocacy to advance quality in undergraduate student learning. This includes programming and a scholarly agenda that focuses on general education, faculty development, teaching and learning practice, and evidence-based instruction enhanced by technology. For the latter, key foci include artificial intelligence, AI, digital equity, open learning, and e-portfolios. Teaching with AI, a practical guide to a new era of human learning, Johns Hopkins University Press 2024, is his latest book. His book series on general education reform from Routledge will arrive in early 2025. Dr. Watson also directs AAC&U's Institute on AI, Pedagogy, and the Curriculum, the Institute on Digital Equity, the Institute on Open Educational Resources, and the Forum on Digital Innovation, and co-directs the Institute on General Education, Pedagogy, and Assessment, and the Conference on General Education, Pedagogy, and Assessment. Additional areas of leadership include an array of curricular and pedagogical improvement efforts, including the development of assignment design tools which align with AAC&U's value rubrics. We could spend the whole hour just going over your background, Eddie. Anyway, so let me turn things over to our wonderful guest, Dr. Watson.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Really glad to be here. Creative Commons and AAC&U have a number of different collaborations here and there, and folks from CC will often speak at our Institute on Open Educational Resources or other events that we do. So I'm more than happy to be here and sort of return the favor, the many favors that Creative Commons has done for me over the past months and years. So really excited to be here. Also, we've got kind of a smaller group. Looks like it's nearing maybe 40. Definitely just feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. If you've got questions, I have 7,000 slides, so I can certainly keep going, but I really hope that you'll engage me in conversation. I'll try to keep my eye on the chat window, but Jonathan's definitely going to be keeping an eye there, and I've encouraged him to interrupt me as we go forward. So, we've got this presentation that's loosely called Generative AI and OER. That gives me lots of latitude and space to talk about a lot of different things. I'm really going to kind of begin by talking a bit about maybe the larger landscape regarding artificial intelligence, really within the world of work and how it's changing things, and how I believe that this is now necessitating that higher education see artificial intelligence as essential learning. We'll kind of go through this arc and share a number of the evidence points regarding that larger notion, but then also pivot a bit to how we can leverage AI to help with course design and the development of course materials, and then further kind of drill down, like, well, if we did create things with AI, can we copyright it? How do we move forward with some of those kinds of questions within the context of some of the work that you're engaging in right now? So lots of topics here. I'm more than happy to chat about anything, but I'm going to just dive right in and see where it takes us. Well, I guess I want to begin first with the notion of artificial intelligence, and maybe many of us remember the first place we were whenever we first heard of or got to see generative AI. And like you, there's people that bring things to me. I've got colleagues that will come and share, hey, have you seen this yet? Have you tried this on your phone? But I get most of my best ideas from my youngest son, who's college age, my son Carter. He came home from college in December of 2022 and walked in the house and dropped his laundry and said, "Hey, Dad, have you heard of ChatGPT?" And I was like, yeah, I think I've heard of it. And he said, "Well, have you seen it yet? Have you tried it?" And I said, "I have not." And he said, "Well, let's go in the kitchen." So we go in there, he opens up his laptop, pulls up the chatgpt.com website, and puts his hands on the keyboard. And then he says, "So, Dad, what do you ask students?" And I said, what do I ask? You mean like an assignment? And he said, yeah, what's an assignment that you give your students? And so I kind of started to describe something, and he was taking notes furiously on the computer. And after I kind of described this assignment, he said, does this match what you just said? Like, is this accurate? And I said, yeah, that pretty much covers it. And then when he hit return, it's now in family lore that the next words out of my mouth were, oh no. Because I instantly saw the academic integrity challenges that was going to bring forward to the wealth of us in higher education, especially those of us that assign writing assignments to our students. The next question out of my mouth was, do students know about this yet? And he said, absolutely, everybody knows about this. This again was December of 2022 after it had been out for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. But when he brings me new ideas, he often prefaces them with the notion of this is going to change your life. Like he took me to the Apple store, and this is a photo of him trying out the Apple Vision Pro glasses. He's like, Dad, this is going to change your life. You've got to try this out. It almost never changes my life, to be honest. And the Apple Vision Pro was a really great example of that, of something that's not going to change my life. It's 87 pounds on your head, and you got to type in the air. Some new form of carpal tunnel would come about. I was like, yeah, this isn't going to find a place in my life, but I do believe Carter was right this time, that this is indeed changing our life. I think that as we begin using it more and more, it's not only going to change our relationship with work, but it's actually going to adjust the way that we engage in thinking, the way that we engage in problem solving. I know that I'm definitely seeing that in my practice now. I think AI is also changing average. I think very much the definition of average, I mean, very much in the sense of like our syllabi and what was maybe once a C, whenever there are assignments that we would allow students to use AI, since students now have a partner, what was once a C, is that still a C? Maybe we need to raise our standards a bit, rethink what the grading criteria might be for past assignments where we now know that students have a collaborator in completing some of that work. And AI is also changing creativity, and I'm going to speak really specifically to that topic as we talk about AI within the context of open education. So, sort of taking a step back, I mean, when you think about when the World Wide Web first came about in 1991, prior to that, um, information was fairly scarce, but it was reliable. Like you might have a hard time finding or gaining access to it. You have to go to a library or go to a bookstore, but when you found it, you could pretty much trust that information was good. But then as the web came about and then social media in the early 2000s, I mean, you can find anything online. You can find an opinion for or against every topic just about under the sun. So that's why many libraries and freshman writing programs now have modules or entire courses on information literacy, encouraging students to think critically about the things that they find online, try to triangulate sources, multiple sources that then all point to the same outcome or same summary of findings. Those information literacy skills are maybe even more important in the AI age. But I would say it's not so much just about a relationship with knowledge, that AI is actually changing, again, our relationship with thinking. So where are we seeing this in the world of work, where actually processes are changing as a result of AI? A good example of this is within the settings around radiology. I mean, in many hospital settings now, you go and you have your scan, and before it goes to a radiologist, there's now a layer of AI that performs a couple of tasks. One, it might clean up the quality of the scan, but then it might also, as it turns over the process to the radiologist to do the read of the scan, certainly would say read the whole thing, but pay special attention to what's inside this red box, or look where these yellow arrows are. This is what you need to pay special attention to. And as a result of this new collaboration with AI guiding us in some of the work that we do, or at least coaching us in some directions, we are now in these settings detecting 20% more cancers than were found in the previous process. So this is a pretty positive addition of AI in our world. And it's not just the world of health that we're seeing this. There's a tool called Co-Counsel that law offices are now adopting, and it will review a contract or create a draft of a contract, provide feedback on a contract that has come in. I was talking with a senior vice president at Rutgers University this summer, and he said he oversees the he sees a whole bunch of things, but the law function of the university was under his purview. And he said that his lawyers, he's known for years that his lawyers were really good at catching things that were wrong in contracts. They've got a paragraph, they're reading it, they make corrections. They weren't necessarily good at catching things that were missing. And he says co-counsel is good at both of those things. In fact, co-counsel's tagline is so that you can do more of what AI can't. And that's exactly what Rutgers has done. They've rethought job descriptions for their junior lawyers. And so it's a little bit less about contract crafting and contract review. It's more about looking at the feedback that AI provides and making, of course, expert decisions on what should be changed and what shouldn't be changed. But now, because there's less work doing sort of junior level contract review, they're now encouraging those junior lawyers to actually play more of a project manager kind of role. Like, how can you facilitate or move a contract, or really an idea for a contract, from that initial genesis all the way through to signing, and then the work commences? So it's an interesting notion. I mean, it's like, okay, so the job descriptions are changing a bit here, but how how does this really function in the long term? Like, if you don't have junior level lawyers doing junior level work for several years, how do we get senior level lawyers? And I think there are a lot of fields that we're going to see a similar kind of challenge with, where there's just, if AI takes over certain kinds of tasks that build further expert competency within us, within the world of work, how do we ever matriculate to those higher levels? So something possibly to look out for. Another place that we're seeing AI make inroads is, when we call those customer service lines. I probably shouldn't use the name of a real company, so I'll just make up a fictional company. I'll call it AT&T. Whenever I call AT&T, I'm often fairly frustrated by that experience. I'm the person that always presses zero. I've learned that if you press zero 7 to 9 times, it's going to kick you out of the tree of responses to. They'll get you to a real person. But now there's AI that resides in the headset of many customer service representatives. It's almost impossible now to call a customer service line without first hearing this may be recorded, or this is being, your conversation is being observed or recorded in some fashion. So now the headset will provide feedback to the customer service representative. It'll say things like, this customer sounds upset. Try to de-escalate. Or if you pause as the customer service person, if you pause too long, it will provide you with an answer to what the customer or the client just asked for. So to provide content information. So as a result of this kind of on-the-job coaching, where they're finding that customer sentiment's improving, that there's fewer requests, angry people, let me talk to your manager kind of thing. They're actually resolving more issues per hour because of the extra coaching and the extra information there. And actually, employee retention is improving. That employees, especially those that are new and might be in sort of a high stress context, getting that kind of coaching right when they need it is actually leading them to feel more comfortable in that job. They feel more competent. They feel more supported in ways that, talking to someone at the end of the day. So did you have any issues today? And then they relate the 6 things that happened that have already passed and they had to handle themselves. Now that they're getting that coaching in the moment, employees in these contexts are a little bit happier. I guess in my less cynical moments, I guess I'm hopeful that AI is going to make all of us happier, that there's certain kinds of tasks that we would never want to pass off to AI because we feel we're really good at it or that we really enjoy it. There's a lot of things that go along with teaching and learning that I would want to hold on to. When I was at the University of Georgia, which was my last job before AAC&U, where I am now, I was the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. I really love the puzzle that is, learning and cognition and teaching and all of those things. So I'll hold on to those things. But there was one semester at Georgia where I, between February and April, received 48 requests from students for letters of recommendation. There was one spring where I had 48 requests. And I really value that work. I feel like it's really important work, but that's also a lot of time. But now with AI, you can get a student's resume, the job description for which they've applied and ask them what might be three strengths you want me to highlight in this letter, and then share that with AI, and AI would craft a letter. And then for me, I always felt like the most powerful thing I've ever written in my letters of recommendation, either for faculty or students, would be the personal story. Like, well, I had Carla in my class and she led a team and it was amazing how she pulled everyone together to bring forth this great project, those kinds of personal stories. So I would still add that. But where a writing a letter might from scratch might take me, let's say 45 minutes to an hour, having AI do a draft that I then read every word of, I edit, I add my own pieces, I put it on the letterhead, all of those things. I'm still the authoritative voice in that process, but rather than it taking me an hour, it might take me 20 minutes. So if I reclaim 24 hours in the month of March, well, how might I do things differently? Might I reinvest in my students or reinvest in my scholarship, whatever it might be? So I'm hopeful that that's what we're going to see as among the outcomes of AI entering more and more into our lives, generative AI in our lives. So, what are we seeing more broadly, maybe in aggregate, of what's taking place in the world of work? I mean, there was a study at Stanford that looked at the Federal Job Index, which has 961 job descriptions within it. And those researchers concluded that every last job, every last federal job had at least one task that AI could do better today. Now, that doesn't mean these jobs are going away, not at all. But what it means is that the job descriptions for many positions, maybe the vast majority of positions in America will be evolving over time, where there'll be new tasks that are associated with AI, and then there's some things that maybe we won't be doing anymore as a result of AI. So there was a study put out by the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania that has been surveying employees to track adoption of generative AI within the workplace. And their survey had asked, are you using generative AI, at least once a week in the workplace? And, and you can see a lot of different fields across the screen here, but the far left is in aggregate. And a year ago, it was 37% of employees said that they were using generative AI. And as of this past fall, it was up to 72%. That's a pretty significant jump in those that are using generative AI. And I guess as I think about, it's January, and on many of our campuses, we have students that well, it's February now, isn't it? 2 or 3 weeks ago, we started the spring semester, and we have seniors that are going to graduate in May. Would we anticipate that, when they graduate, 75% of people across all jobs, functions will be using generative AI, maybe 80%? And I guess one of the challenges that we have in higher ed right now is, well, we have a short-term challenge. Like, we know we have students graduating in 4 months. What might we do to prepare them for the world that awaits them post-graduation? Some more data from the world of work. We see that there are uh, surveys of employers, so like those at the CEO, sort of president, vice president level. Amazon World Services performed this survey across all fields, not just IT, but healthcare, finance, every kind of job. And this was just over a year ago, and at that time, 19 out of 20 employers said, "Yeah, if we're not already using generative AI, we realize that we're going to be folding this in a variety of different ways." Employers also noted that they're having trouble filling positions, that there's just this AI skills gap out there in the world of the talent pool of possible candidates to hire. But when asked specifically, well, okay, so you're recognizing there's this broad um, skill gap. How do we solve that? And most employers point to higher education. They said that we're the logical place within American society where this is going to be solved. This skills gap is going to be solved. And I think that's really good because there's a number of different competitors that have already come to the marketplace. LinkedIn and Microsoft and others have micro credentials and certificates in AI or AI literacy. Um, so we're still seen, though, as the logical solution provider to this particular challenge. And actually, if you also look at these certificate programs, they're moving more into our bread and butter. There's like, you can get a critical thinking micro credential or certificate, and a writing certificate and things like that coming from the private sector, specifically within the IT world. When employers were asked So what skills does a student need to be able to use AI well? I was really pleased to see this list because these are all things that we currently teach students. Critical thinking was at the very top of the list, and this is often a general education outcome on our campus. So that's really good to see. There's also creative thinking, technical skills, ethics. We're really glad to see ethics up there. Those were the top four, and you can see communication, math, and on down the list are other skills that are there. But I think part of it for us then is thinking, okay, so we understand that it's these skills in a specific context. But as you look at the world of work, and I think all of us, regardless of institution type, would agree at least part of the purpose of higher education is to prepare students for life beyond graduation. And if we think about recognizing this huge influx of expectation around using generative AI, well, what is it that we then teach our students? And to me, I think that there's sort of like a generalized learning outcome that we might term AI literacy. And thinking about what might be contained in that, I think there's sort of two sets of uh, sort of buckets of dimensions or skills. I mean, there's some things that students need to know before they ever hit the first sort of prompt across the tennis net to AI. And among the things that our students need to have is number one, a mindset, an orientation that AI doesn't do work for you, rather it does it with you. So in other words, there's an important role for the human in those instances where you evoke AI into that work, and that you're ultimately going to be held responsible for whatever you turn in or whatever you use um, that AI created. So that's a pretty significant mindset for students to adopt because many students have seen AI as an opportunity to have it do the work for them. But then there's other technical challenges, like there's an array of different AI tools out there, and which tool you use, do you use and when? And then thinking about the ethical implications. I mean, there are times when maybe AI shouldn't be used from an ethical standpoint, or sometimes it might just be a bad idea. Like if you just got back medical results via MyChart, in your email, is it a good idea to take that to AI and have it provide you with feedback regarding what the implications are of that blood test? Or would it be better to go to see your doctor? Or would it be better to like maybe go to the Mayo Clinic website? So I think helping students understand those things are part of what we need to be teaching our students in college these days. Um, there's also a whole world of prompt engineering, and there's certain ways to ask AI to get better quality output. Ask it to play the role of an expert or providing it with more information can help refine and tailor and frame the output that comes from AI. So there's a bit of instruction required around that. And then once they start working with AI, there's a whole additional skill set that they need to be employing. And part of it is around just being able to review and evaluate the quality of the output, looking for accuracy and thinking about issues of bias. And then there's additional editorial choices that will need to be made where you think about audience and you think about purpose and that kind of editing that's required. And then, of course, because you can iterate with generative AI, you can go back and forth with it. It remembers what you asked 3 questions ago, so you can kind of have that conversation and build upon it. It has working memory, essentially, unlike most search engines. So teaching students how to iterate. And then finally, when a student thinks they've finished with a project, whatever it is, whether it's an email or whether it's, a presentation or a paper or whatever they might be working on, do they see their contribution and is it superior or did it refine or did it contribute to that final product? And if a student doesn't see themselves in that work, then maybe they need to take a step back into that work and ensure that they're present in it. I really don't think employers are going to pay like someone right out of college $45,000 a year just to be able to ask AI a good question. There's an expectation that they bring more to that position, to that world of work. Um, so a little bit about the world of AI. I mean, often whenever people talk about AI, it's kind of like they're just talking about Chat GPT as if generative AI is just this monolithic world and it's just that one thing. But the truth is that there are a number of foundational large language models out there, and this world's actually growing. But it's kind of like the initial landscape looked like this, where you did have Chat GPT kind of at the heart of everything. but that's a product of a company called OpenAI. But OpenAI's been invested in to the tune of tens of billions of dollars by Microsoft. So really, ChatGPT is a product of those two companies working together. In fact, if you've used Copilot from Microsoft, that's actually just a pass through to ChatGPT. It's the same brain, it's the same large language model that's being employed. So if you're using Copilot or ChatGPT, you're using the same thing. But then there are competitors out there in this space. There's Anthropic. They have a tool called Claude. Google has Gemini. I mean, I kind of prefer Claude because it's as you know, I like AI as a brainstorming partner. Like, give me 10 titles for a workshop with this abstract that I'll have a pun within the title. Give me 10 or 20 to choose from or to think about or to refine. I like Claude because it seems to have more divergent thinking, kind of like a broader spread of ideas, but also because it has this broader spread of ideas, it tends to hallucinate more if I'm asking it factual questions. So maybe Claude's not where I go for that kind of work. I mean, I think ChatGPT writes a really good business letter. Claude, for me, is a better brainstorming partner. There are other tools out there. The Elon Musk X world has a tool called Grok, now Grok 2. Um, Oh, Grok is kind of like the uncle you don't want your kids to spend too much time with. There's if you want to see bias on display, if you're teaching bias, you might get more biased content if you go to Grok. Um, so yeah, there's this world, and again, there are new things that have appeared out there. Of course, the DeepSeek from China has gained a lot of market share, at least in conversation discussions over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I think it's outpacing OpenAI in downloads from the Apple Store. So there's new models emerging every day, but you're probably thinking, okay, well, you're saying there are these six, and there's maybe 3 or 4 more of these foundational large language models, but you've seen dozens, if not hundreds, of tools out there. Like, Grammarly says it's got AI, and Apple says it's got AI. Actually, most of them are just passing through requests through something called an open API. So it's like a computer science mechanism, essentially. A lot of the AI on my new iPhone, Grammarly is passing through some of its AI requests, actually the Chat GPT. So literally the new AI on I just downloaded the new OS today, and there's new features, and my phone, of course, has had it for a few weeks now. But it's actually Apple is using ChatGPT, which is a Microsoft partially created tool or funded tool. So that's what this world kind of looks like right now. But the foundational models are probably what underscores most of the tools that you might use out there, like Research Rabbit and Consensus and a whole bunch of other things like that. They're all using ChatGPT in the background. Probably 80% of the tools that you find out there that say that they have generative AI components, they're probably leveraging ChatGPT. The truth is, if you use any of these tools, there's free paths in to these tools, but if you use them, the first thing they're going to do, they're going to ask you for information, like, hey, can I get those digits? What's your phone number? Is one thing that they ask, and then they also ask for your email address. And then after you use them for a little bit, they'll say you've had enough. If you'd like to continue to use it, that would be $20 a month. Or some of them have more advanced models that, like ChatGPT has a more advanced model called Operator that's $200 a month. But if you want to keep using the free version, go right ahead. And the free version, like ChatGPT, they literally dumb down the free version to make you frustrated with it as part of their business model to drive you to want to pay the $20 a month. So that's part of what you'll find in this world. But then as we think about bringing AI into our classes and even as having an assignment where students are required to use AI, if you have students that are using the free version, they're going to get far poorer responses than those that are paying for access. And so if we think about our students, who's more likely to be paying for access to a generative AI tool? Would it be your affluent students, or would it be your Pell eligible students? Yeah, so this creates some real digital inequities within our universities, and I think each university and probably the CIO's office at every university needs to solve the access challenge in the same way that every student has access to the learning management system like Blackboard or Canvas or Desire to Learn on your campus. Every student and faculty member has access to the same version of the email client. Someone doesn't have a better version of email than someone else. There's sort of like a level playing field in those respects. And the set of researchers took a look at a variety of different standardized tests and just ran the tests through the free version of ChatGPT versus a paid version. And sure enough, the paid version does quite a bit better on everything across the board, except for AP psychology, it looks like. But whether we're talking about AP tests or the GRE or the SAT or the LSAT or the bar exam, if you have the paid tools, if you have access to the better tools, you get better quality, more accurate responses. So that's one challenge for us around AI in higher education. But I think what we've really where we've kind of gotten to is that we have a grand challenge ahead of us right now that we're all participating in. And part of it is that there's two different instincts. I mean, there's one instinct, one logic path that leads us to say we really need to be adopting AI as essential learning for higher education. That means we need to find where in the curriculum we're going to be teaching this, and then those courses then need to make sure all of those students have access to the tools. But again, if part of the purpose of higher ed is to prepare students for the world of work and the world post-graduation, then we must be teaching AI. That's one logic path. There are other logic paths. Another logic path is my oh no logic path, where how could we ever bring this into the classroom? It can be used so easily to cheat. Why would we ever bring that in? Or it could further be used to diminish student learning. So a student asks AI, hey, here's my writing assignment that I just got today. Provide me with a detailed outline regarding everything I should write for this paper. It should be 5 pages in length. Provide me with the outline. The student then does a bunch of little micro writing assignments following the outline and then turns in that paper. They wrote every word. So one question is that even cheating? But one thing that's certainly occurring, the student isn't deciding what goes in the paper, what doesn't belong in the paper, what to emphasize within the paper, what the order of things should be within that paper. So I would argue that AI has the potential to diminish learning. If used in that way, students might not as richly achieve the learning outcomes that we already have for our courses that aren't going away. So that's another reason that we would think about, well, how do we prevent or keep AI from interfering with student learning or interfering with what we're already doing within our classes. So I do think this is a grand challenge. I mean, there's times when we say we have to keep this out of the classroom. There's times when we say we must bring this into the classroom. So navigating that curricular and pedagogical challenge is what is very much ahead of us. So, I mean, one of the strategies we have is that we say that it's cheating, that we have to keep it out of the classroom. And there are times when we want to see what students can do without technology. So we have proctoring that's available to us. There's oral exams. Carter came home from college in May this past year, and I'm doing the dad thing. So, son, how was college and how were those finals and stuff like that? And he said, well, everything was great, but it was really weird. I had to go to the bookstore for a couple of my classes for the final, and I had to buy this packet of paper stapled together. And I said, well, was the cover blue? And he was like, how did you know, Dad? And it's like, yeah, blue books have made a resurgence on campuses. I actually observed a friend of mine who teaches at a local university where I live, him using blue books during the fall for the midterm. And, we were just sort of, he wanted me there and we were chatting a bit about sort of like returning to, I wouldn't call it the good old days, but returning to something that at least we felt confident that the work we would be grading was the product of that student and not the student plus AI or AI alone. But I noticed that about 15 minutes in of the student's writing, I saw one student, she laid down her pen and she was shaking her hand like this. And about 5 minutes after, there were a lot of students who were stretching their hands because they just don't write. They just don't write that long or that much anymore. So I think there's times where we're going to see that these are tools that we want to employ, different surveillance techniques or proctoring, or, if class sizes will enable oral exams. But these are all things we should keep in our toolbox. Again, there's times we want to see what students can do without technology. But sometimes it's difficult to tell when a student is actually cheating or what we would agree is cheating. I think most of us, if a student gave AI a writing a prompt that they were assigned, and it gave them a paper, and then they put their name on that paper and turned that in. That feels like cheating. Students and faculty agree that's cheating. Just this past, I guess it was 12 days ago, I collaborated with some colleagues at another university. We released a report. It's free on the AACNU website. And it is, we gave different scenarios to senior leaders. 335 college and university presidents and provosts and deans responded to the survey. We gave scenarios and asked them, is this cheating or is this not cheating? And like the notion of AI provided an outline, so scenario one on the screen, AI provides an outline and then the student writes the paper. Is that cheating? Almost a clear split. 51% said, yes, this is legitimate, this is okay. But then another 49% either said, I'm not sure if that's cheating, or this is definitely cheating. So we're not even sure what cheating necessarily is any longer. I mean, you have AI write a draft and then the student edits. Is that cheating? As a student writes something themselves and then gives it to AI and asks for feedback. How do I improve this based upon the grading rubric of the faculty member? Is this cheating? Again, a lot of diversity in responses. But ultimately, I mean, whether we like it or not, I think we're finding that, what we call cheating in higher ed, business is calling progress. Some of the students that we interviewed, focus grouped for our Teaching with AI book, we had one student in particular that was kind of like working 30 hours a week and taking like 2 or 3 college classes. So kind of like a little bit more than part-time at both her work and her collegiate career. She had, her boss had told her, hey, look, you take too long writing these press releases for the business. I want you to start with AI and then edit and then get me the draft before we send it out because it's just taking too long this other way. You must always start with AI. But interestingly, that same semester, she had decided to take a business writing class because she knew she was struggling with that kind of writing. And the business writing professor said, you can never use Chat GPT or generative AI in this class. You can never use it. And so what she's hearing is, I'm paying out of my pocket to go to college to prepare me for what waits for me after college. You're telling me I can never use a tool that my boss is telling me I always have to use. Why aren't you preparing me for the world of work? Now, in truth, there's a conversation that's not taking place there, right? I mean, the faculty member likely was thinking, you don't know enough to be able to use AI well or competently. It's just going to be something that does the work for you. So in my class, until you develop foundational skills, you really can't be using AI. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. I think it's really important that we are transparent with our students about these choices that we make regarding when we outlaw AI and when we evoke it in. In fact, I think, many faculty now have AI policies on their syllabi. I think it's a great step. I think we also need to think about maybe we're at a moment in time where we need to have an AI statement in every assignment, even like discussion board posts, that we give our students. Like, when can you use AI and when is it forbidden? And then why? I mean, that whole notion of tilt, if you've heard of tilt before, is research around transparency in learning and teaching. That actually, if you tell your students why you're having them do something in a certain way, like if you're transparent about your pedagogy, they then are more likely to sort of wrap their heads around and embrace your approach rather than be resistant to it. I mean, a lot of that was found in as flipping the classroom was rolling out. Like, students were really frustrated by it, but if you tell students why you're doing it, what the research says, they're more likely to go, okay, I get it. Yeah, this is about my learning. Okay, I see how this works. So the same thing goes with AI. Also, your AI policy on your syllabus or maybe on an individual assignment might also address AI prompts and how AI should be credited, and also a notion about the student's ultimate accountability for their work. Um, so there's a real desire among many faculty for there to be a tool that could just tell if students did indeed do sort of like the raw cheating. AI produced text, they drop it into Word, and they turn it in as their own work. So there's this world of AI detection out there. The problem is AI detection has many flaws. Its accuracy varies considerably from one tool to the next or one type of writing to the next, like shorter writing prompts. It's really not good at making a guess. I'm often asked, as I go from one campus to the next, talking about the book or talking about um, AI for teaching and learning. I'm often asked, well, these AI detectors, do they work? And I say, well, they work better than faculty. There's research that shows that we can tell about 56% of the time. We're not really good at picking out the AI voice. And plus, students have kind of figured out how to fool AI detectors. If you go out into Instagram and TikTok and search for how do I fool an AI detector, there's videos with hundreds of thousands of hits that'll say, hey, all you have to do is put some typos in your paper. AI doesn't make typos. So put in some typos and it'll fool an AI detector. And lo and behold, a study last year looked at just that. And sure enough, if you put typos in your paper, you're more likely to fool an AI detector. So, one of the questions is well, how significant is this problem of students cheating with AI? I mean, as I go from one campus to the next, I've had people say, I think all of my students are cheating with AI, or I bet half of my students are. But there are some indicators out there. There's a company called Turnitin, which was one of the first to market with their AI detection tool. I think everyone knows of Turnitin for plagiarism, but they also have an AI detector tool built in there. And last April, they heralded the 1-year anniversary of coming to market with their tool, and they said that they had reviewed more than 200 million papers. That's a lot of papers. That's probably K-12 as well as higher education would almost have to be given that number. But in that same press release, they said that of those 200 million of papers they reviewed, 22 million were flagged as having at least 20% AI writing. So 22 million out of 200 million. That's 20%. That's 10%. That's like 10 or 11% of those that reviewed had at least 20% AI writing. So, that's not all of our students or half of our students. It's like about 1 in 10. So if you're teaching a class of 30, then that means maybe 3 or 4 students for a given writing assignment selected to use AI in a way that, well, number one, it could be detected. Like AI wrote something and they dropped it in their paper and they turned it into you. But that's a very different kind of problem than, everyone is cheating. So one other challenge around AI detection is that they all report having some level of false positive and actually turn it in so that they have a 4% false positive rate. Well, 4% of 22 million means that their first year, nearly 1 million students were falsely flagged as having used AI when they didn't. And I think that's hugely problematic for higher ed. I mean, we knew we already have a student mental health crisis, and there are these declining confidence in Americans' higher education. I think we're actually doing a lot of damage to students and a lot of damage to our institutions whenever we use tools that we know have false positive rates. But as we were focus grouping for the book, we had in every focus group, students echoed this sentiment of one particular student who said, we're not worried about being caught cheating with AI. We're worried that we're going to be falsely accused of cheating with AI. Everyone knows someone that has happened to. So there are an array of strategies available to us to kind of help diminish cheating. I mean, research tells us that actually, if you kind of talk to your students about cheating and academic integrity, they're less likely to cheat. So having that conversation recursively in your course makes really good sense. In other words, if you talk about it on day 1 of the class during the syllabus and then there's a midterm, it's as if you never had the conversation because so much time has passed. But right before the midterm in March, having that conversation again. So remember we talked about academic integrity and how we want everyone to have a sort of a fair, equal opportunity to perform well on the exam. Jonathan, I see your hand. Is that a question? You got a question for me? I have not been
I
keeping
just
up with
wanted to make sure that I'm loving your presentation. I've just been a bunch of questions in the chat that I'm just hoping that you're going to give us a little bit of time to address some of the questions in the chat. Some
I've
of them
got about 5 more minutes. I got about
okay,
5 more minutes of stuff, and then we're going to jump over. Okay. To talk about academic integrity, also having a bit of flexibility in your class. Like, if you've got 5, let's say, writing assignments, each one worth 15% of the final grade. What if for 3 out of 5, you told students that, for any 3 out of 5, you can ask for a 2-day extension, no questions asked, and no grade penalty. I mean, if you look at the reasons why students cheat, it's one of the top reasons is that they mismanaged their time. And then when it came to do the work, they realized, oh my gosh, I don't have enough time to get this done. And so then they have to pivot to cheat because they've mismanaged their time. But if you give them an opportunity to ask for an extension, that means they're less likely to cheat, and then they're more likely to do the work, which means they're actually going to do the learning. So lots of ways to kind of move, in a class of 30, instead of there being 3 or 4 students cheating, maybe it's just 3 or 2, or maybe it's just 1 or 2 if we provide these kinds of flexibilities into our classroom. Of course, as we think about leveraging AI ourselves, I mean, we can use AI for course design. I mean, all the way to create a course on a special topics course like one that I've taught in the past on becoming an agent of change. And then as it provides 16 weeks of content, you can say, well, then what would I teach on Monday, Wednesday, Friday? You can ask AI to take a syllabus and transform it to a new version of the course, whether it's going from face-to-face to online, or reimagining a course for students who maybe didn't have a prereq, or something that was once a prereq when you taught it. It's now no longer a required course. Um, Also, within the world of OER, we're seeing there being quite a bit of interest in the notion of creating free materials for students. I think a lot of faculty have the overarching goal of like, I just want to diminish the cost and the access barriers associated with an expensive textbook. And if there's not a textbook that already exists, a free OER that already exists within my domain, well, then I'll just see if I could create one with an AI. And it's very easy to do. The prompt like create an outline for a textbook for a college freshman, taking anatomy and physiology, which when I was at the University of Georgia, that was pretty much the most expensive textbook on campus. Not quite, there are a couple of others, but that was at the gen ed level, that was one of them. But you could say this textbook should have 20 chapters, and then it will then break down and provide an outline for you. Then you could say for chapter 2, the chemical basis of life, write that chapter. It should be 3,000 words in length, include citations, and include review questions at the end. So one thing to note is you can put together a textbook, a draft textbook, in an afternoon. But then there's probably weeks, if not months, of additional work, right? I mean, you'd want to read every word of it. You'd want to double check the citations, and maybe add your own images, write your own text. There's a lot of work to be done before that might be ready for prime time. But to create a draft textbook that you could distribute to students, it's possible. And there's other things that you can do. I think that AI is kind of closing some of the challenge gaps around OER as a competitor to like expensive textbooks that come with like the database of quiz questions for the entirety of the textbook. But because OpenStack's material, for instance, is out there in public domain, it's in the large language model of all of the foundational large language models out there. So you can go to ChatGPT and say, using the OpenStack's anthropology textbook as your source, create 10 multiple choice questions based on this chapter, and then ask it for an answer key, or then ask it to transform that quiz into a format that would make it easily uploadable into Desire to Learn. You could certainly use it that way. My publisher, Johns Hopkins University Press, he was telling me some of the issues that they've had recently with some authors asking, hey, I've got a book. I'd like to create a workbook based on my book. Can I use AI for that? And our publisher had said, well, no, we can't publish that because that's not copyrightable. However, I'm sure that this course will be talking at greater length about this, but just last week, there was a new report from the U.S. Copyright Office, and it's on copyright and artificial intelligence. And a couple of the things that it points out is that the outputs of generative AI can be protected by copyright under a certain set of circumstances, essentially where a human author is making sufficient enough edits to it. It further says that the inclusion of AI generated material in a larger human generated work does not bar copyrightability. So I imagine this is among the conversations that my colleagues at Creative Commons have been having recently, given, okay, so output from AI, number one, do we feel that it's an ethical choice to even think about copywriting material that we know is based on someone else's copyrighted material? This is, of course, January 29th. This is just emerging, but it's definitely something that becomes another thread of conversation within the OER world. And I think we collectively as a field will determine how we might move forward with it. But I really look forward to Creative Commons leadership on exactly what might be some best practices there. And I guess finally, the last thing I want to talk a bit about is that if you have access to the full version of ChatGPT, you can create a customized GPT. I have colleagues at Kennesaw State University that took the OpenStax writing guide and dropped it into and made a custom GPT within Chat GPT. And they basically turned off all of the other access points. So there's no access to the web, there's no access to everything else within the Chat GPT brain. Everything, the only source for responses regarding content to prompts that are placed in this custom GPT, the only feedback comes from that OpenStax textbook. So there's no hallucinations, there's no drawing from other data sources. It's just from that particular source. So then a student can then ask questions of that particular textbook. And you could do this with the entirety of the OpenStax catalog or every OER that you might find out there. So yeah, I mean, Jeannie Law is her name. More than happy to share her contact information if you'd like to play around with the tool that she built. But the barrier to entry is really low. It's really easy to create these kinds of things now. So this is pretty much a quick view of this landscape and what some of the capabilities are as it relates to this world. But Jonathan, I'm going to stop the presentation and more than happy to respond to questions that you've seen that have come up that seem really salient to the work of this certificate program or just interesting in general.
Let's see. I think we're quite short on time, so let me just sort of try to lump a bunch of them together rather than going specifically. I think we had, to the benefit of the people here, we had a lot of creative thought and critical thinking going on. And I think a lot of people have some concerns kind of on the other end from what you're describing. You're describing applications and uses in classrooms. People had questions about privacy concerns, so about the things that they do with, being sucked into used by these companies, and concerned about environmental impacts. So again, training or, the server side, which we as users don't really see. And I guess also someone made very interesting comment, I think in the context of Creative Commons, someone made a comment about how there needs to be a consent culture, and I'm interpreting what they said, but I think that what they meant was, if you look at Creative Commons licenses, they all have the buy license clause, which means that you're supposed to acknowledge that you are using someone else's work. And I think a lot of people who see the output of generative AI say, well, what was ingested to produce that? And is anyone getting any credit? The people who did the human creativity on which all of this machine remixing is based. So I wonder if you could discuss some of those kind of back end issues all in one big lump.
I will try to do so. There's a lot of really important points there for sure. I mean, I find it incredibly ironic and hilarious that OpenAI wants to sue DeepSeek because DeepSeek used some of their output, yet they took all of our content and there's no credit, none of us got. So I don't know, that I find that hilarious that that's their stance. But yeah, OpenAI, these companies aren't transparent about their large language model partially because they see it as a competitive advantage, but they're being sued. I mean, the New York Times is one of the most famous cases of a lawsuit. So I'm going to give you a really cynical though honest answer. I think that especially with the emergence of DeepSeek from China, I think that these generative AI tools, I think the companies are going to be fairly protected by the government because it's seen as a national security imperative. That these tools aren't just, this isn't just students cheating, that this is seen as next generation. I don't like to use necessarily the word warfare, but there's definitely, these tools will be used as we move forward, trying to gain a competitive advantage over our competitors. So I don't see there being limits legally put in place on these companies. And to be honest, if the New York Times, if they win their lawsuit and then OpenAI says, well, hey, here's $100 million for you to kind of go away and we keep the content, I think the New York Times, given how publishing struggles a bit in this era, I imagine they would probably accept whatever that might be. In fact, I doubt we'll ever see. I think there'll be a settlement out of court, is what I anticipate, especially since we're already seeing companies like Taylor and Francis selling off the entire catalog. Like if you've ever had anything published with Stylus, which has now been pulled into Routledge, which is Taylor and Francis. I mean, many of us have published with Stylus. All of that now is being ingested into Microsoft AI, which I assume means Chat GPT. So they've ingested everything freely available online. That doesn't mean that it's free content or that the IP is free, but just if it's online, it's been ingested into the large language model. So now they're buying up content. That's the next place that they're going. I mean, Jonathan mentioned my book series coming out. Whenever I signed the contract on that book series, AI was not mentioned, but as a part owner, Routledge is able to pass that off to Microsoft. So as soon as I turn in the manuscript, it'd probably be in Microsoft AI before it hits the bookstore shelves. So yeah, that's I think the cynical truth is that I think that privacy is going to be compromised. I think IP is severely compromised, and there's not going to be much movement to help with that. Regarding the environment, there are key concerns, but there's also a little bit of a shell game in that conversation right now, in that no one really complained about the environment whenever they're watching Baby Yoda and the new Star Wars series on Disney Plus, but streaming video, it takes an enormous amount of energy and water to cool those server factories as well, server farms. So I think we need to lump this whole thing into a larger conversation and say, well, yes, AI is creating issues. So is YouTube. So is Netflix and HBO Max, and it's so what really needs to happen is that maybe we should require, I mean, ideally in a perfect world, a state might say to build a server farm within our state, you need to generate 60% of your own energy, and it should be renewable. And I think we'll see some states that will take those kinds of stances, and there's other states that won't. And, there's OpenAI is moving in the direction of nuclear energy to meet some of its power needs, to sort of like circumvent maybe um, uh, expectations or needs of the state. But I don't know whether nuclear is the best option that's available to us either. But it is a very realistic concern. But I think being solution driven, it's like, well, how do we solve this? And might renewables play a role? And what would that calculus look like? I think that's probably rather than seeing it as a resistance point to using AI, but rather how do we solve this energy challenge so that we don't further harm the environment? So I covered a bunch of it. Any more, Jonathan, before I let you go?
Can I jump in with one last question? There's
Yeah.
so much that people are so interested in this. There are lots of great questions. One person made a comment about a neurodiverse student who was failed on a paper because Turnitin indicated it detected as AI. And you mentioned also, for example, emotion detection used in those call centers, which, I mean, I live in Europe, and according to the European AI Act, emotion detection is illegal. So I think in large part because people who are non-native speakers of the language being spoken, or people who are neurodiverse, emotion detection really gets it wrong. So I wonder if you could make a comment. We have to close out in another minute, but a quick comment about that.
Yeah, so my recommendation to every campus that I speak at is do not use AI detection. Do not have a tool that you are running every paper through or encouraging faculty to use. And if you do turn off Turnitin's AI detection, let faculty know that doesn't mean that you're on your own. That doesn't mean that you go and use some other tool, because all of the other tools are significantly worse. I could just list them. I'm tracking 18 different AI detection tools out there, and they all have significantly high AI detection tools. And I feel confident that of the millions of students who've been falsely accused, I bet some of them have dropped out of college. I bet there's some students who have maybe even self-harmed as a result. I mean, it's almost certain that has happened. The collateral damage is too great to catch a student for cheating to then ruin another student's life. It doesn't make any sense. The calculus doesn't make sense. Plus, there's lots of other strategies. There's nudges we can put in the classroom. And typically, whenever you think about accusing a student of cheating, you recognize the voice has changed, or there are these really big words, or there's copy and paste issues where you can tell that they brought it in from somewhere else. there's lots of things that you could build a case on regarding academic integrity rather than using a tool that we know falsely accuses a percentage of students. So that's my stance and recommendation on AI detection.
Thank you so much. I think we have to wrap up now. We don't want to keep anyone longer than we promised. That was absolutely amazing, Eddie. That's so fantastic. I want to tell attendees that Eddie has generously said he will share his slide deck with us, and of course, the recording and the chat log for this will be available in the Slack channel for this course. Thanks again. People can click on their reaction buttons and show their appreciation for the wonderful, wonderful presentation from Dr. Eddie Watson.
Thank you so much, everyone.